One cold November evening, after completing a 14-hour route through Oklahoma, Daniel pulled into a nearly abandoned roadside diner outside Tulsa. The neon sign flickered weakly in the rain while old country music played softly through broken speakers inside. Emily sat bundled in her oversized pink hoodie beside him in the booth, coloring quietly on the back of an old receipt while Daniel counted crumpled dollar bills beneath the table, trying to figure out if they could afford dinner and gas. That was when he noticed her. She sat alone near the far window, wrapped in a gray coat clearly too thin for the weather. Her blonde hair was damp from rain, strands sticking against her face while her hands trembled slightly around a cup of untouched coffee. She looked exhausted in a way Daniel recognized immediately. Not physical exhaustion, soul exhaustion, the kind people carried when life had beaten them silently for too long. Emily noticed her first. "Dad?" she whispered softly, tugging his sleeve. "That lady looks sad." Daniel glanced over again. Their eyes met for only a second before the woman quickly looked away, almost embarrassed to be seen. Something about her felt strange, though. Even sitting in that worn diner booth, there was a quiet elegance to her posture. The way she spoke politely to the waitress, the way her eyes observed every detail around her. She didn't seem homeless exactly. She seemed lost. A few minutes later, the elderly waitress approached Daniel's table quietly. "That woman's been sitting here almost 4 hours," she murmured. "Says her wallet got stolen. Barely touched her coffee. I think she's too proud to ask for help." Daniel stared at his remaining cash. $32. That was supposed to buy gas to get home. Emily looked up at him with those same gentle eyes Lily used to have. "Can we help her?" Daniel exhaled slowly, exhausted beyond words, but he already knew the answer before he stood up. He walked over carefully. "Ma'am, I overheard what happened. My daughter and I are heading toward Amarillo in the morning. If you need a ride somewhere safe, we can help." The woman looked genuinely stunned, like kindness itself had surprised her. "You don't even know me," she said quietly. Daniel gave a tired shrug. "Most people don't help strangers anymore. Doesn't mean we should stop trying." For the first time since entering the diner, she smiled faintly. "My name's Sarah." That night changed everything. Sarah rode with them the next morning inside Daniel's aging pickup truck while cold sunlight stretched across endless highways. Emily talked nonstop almost immediately, telling Sarah about school, her favorite cartoons, and how her mom used to sing while making pancakes every Sunday morning. Daniel apologized several times for Emily talking too much, but Sarah shook her head gently. "No," she said softly. "Please let her talk." There was sadness behind those words Daniel couldn't quite understand. Hours passed, and slowly Sarah began opening up, though never fully. She claimed she had been traveling after leaving a difficult corporate job in Chicago, said she needed time away from people who only cared about money and power. Daniel listened quietly while driving, occasionally catching strange contradictions in her stories. Sometimes she sounded like an ordinary exhausted woman trying to escape burnout. Other times she spoke about billion-dollar business decisions with alarming familiarity. Emily adored her almost instantly. By the second day, Sarah was helping Emily braid her hair at truck stops, teaching her card games during breaks, and making her laugh harder than Daniel had heard in months. Watching them together hurt in ways Daniel never expected because for the first time since Lily's death, the emptiness inside their little family felt smaller. One evening they stopped at a cheap roadside motel near New Mexico after Daniel's truck developed transmission trouble. The mechanic demanded nearly $800 for repairs Daniel couldn't afford. Daniel sat outside the motel room that night with his head buried in his hands, while rain tapped softly against rusted railings. "I'm gonna lose my job," he muttered quietly. Sarah sat beside him. "What happened?" Daniel laughed bitterly. "What always happens. One bad week and everything falls apart. Western Horizon already threatened to fire drivers who miss routes this month." Sarah studied him carefully. "What would you do if you weren't afraid?" Daniel frowned. "What? If money didn't control every decision, what kind of life would you want for Emily?" For a long moment, Daniel stared into the rain. "I'd buy a small house somewhere quiet," he finally admitted. "Maybe near Colorado, somewhere with trees. I'd stop driving cross-country all the time. Emily deserves a father who's actually around." Sarah's eyes lowered. "She's lucky to have you at all." Daniel shook his head immediately. No, lucky would have been keeping her mother. Silence settled heavily between them after that. Then Sarah spoke again, her voice barely above a whisper. "Sometimes people with power forget what real life looks like. They stop seeing the damage they cause because they never have to stand in it themselves." Daniel chuckled darkly. "Trust me, Rich people don't care about guys like me. But Sarah didn't answer. The next morning, Daniel woke to discover the truck repair bill had somehow already been paid anonymously. The mechanic refused to explain who covered it. Sarah acted confused too, but Daniel noticed something strange afterward. Several expensive black SUVs sat parked near the highway entrance as they drove away, almost like they had been watching. Over the following days, the mystery around Sarah only deepened. She carried no visible luggage except one old leather bag, yet somehow expensive tailored clothes occasionally appeared after stops in larger cities. She knew luxury hotels by name despite claiming financial struggles. Once, during a phone call she tried hiding from Daniel, he overheard a man saying nervously, "The board is panicking, Ms. Whitmore." Whitmore. Daniel recognized the name instantly. Victoria Whitmore was the billionaire CEO of Whitmore Holdings, one of the largest transportation conglomerates in America, and the parent company that secretly owned Western Horizon Logistics. But that was impossible. Victoria Whitmore was nearly 60 years old according to magazines. Sarah looked barely 35. Still, the uneasiness remained. 3 days later, Daniel returned home to Amarillo. Their tiny house looked even smaller after weeks on the road. Emily immediately dragged Sarah inside proudly, showing her school drawings taped along the refrigerator and the old piano. Lily once played before illness stole the strength from her hands. Sarah walked slowly through the house, absorbing every detail quietly. Daniel noticed tears forming in her eyes while staring at a framed photo of Lily smiling beneath summer sunlight. "She was beautiful," Sarah whispered. "She was everything," Daniel replied softly. That evening, the power suddenly shut off during dinner because Daniel had missed another electric payment. Emily pretended not to notice, continuing to eat canned soup by flashlight while Daniel silently fought humiliation, burning through his chest. Then Sarah quietly stood. "Emily, would you help me outside for 1 second?" The little girl nodded. Daniel remained frozen at the kitchen table until he heard laughter. Outside minutes later, he stepped onto the porch and found Sarah teaching Emily how to catch fireflies beneath the dark Texas sky while distant thunder rolled softly across open fields. For the first time in years, Daniel saw genuine happiness on his daughter's face. That moment terrified him, because deep down he knew people like Sarah didn't stay forever. Over the next week, Sarah remained with them longer than expected. She claimed she was arranging transportation back east, but something about her behavior suggested hesitation. Every day she grew closer to Emily, helping with homework, cooking breakfast, even repairing Lily's neglected garden behind the house. Neighbors began assuming she was Daniel's wife. Daniel never corrected them immediately enough. But strange things kept happening. Daniel's overdue utility bills suddenly disappeared. Emily received anonymous donations covering school lunch debts. The local pharmacy informed Daniel that Lily's remaining medical balance had mysteriously been cleared. Daniel confronted Sarah one night after Emily fell asleep. "You need to tell me the truth." Sarah stood silently near the kitchen sink. "About what?" "About who you really are." The tension between them became suffocating. Finally, Sarah looked at him, fear visible beneath her calm expression. "If I tell you, everything changes." Daniel's jaw tightened. "Then maybe it's already changed." For several seconds, neither spoke. Then headlights suddenly flooded through the front windows. 3 black SUVs rolled slowly onto the dirt driveway outside Daniel's house. Men in suits stepped out immediately. Emily woke upstairs from the noise. Sarah's entire face drained of color. And that was the moment Daniel realized whatever truth she'd been hiding was far bigger than he ever imagined. Emily's small footsteps creaked across the upstairs hallway while thunder rumbled low over the Texas plains, and Daniel instinctively stepped in front of Sarah. The moment the men in black suits approached the porch, every protective instinct inside him ignited at once. He didn't know who those people were or why fear suddenly filled Sarah's eyes. But he knew one thing immediately. Whatever was happening had followed her here. The tallest man reached the porch first, rain dripping from the shoulders of his expensive coat as he removed an earpiece and lowered his voice respectfully. "Ma'am," he said carefully, "we've been looking for you everywhere." Sarah closed her eyes briefly, almost defeated. Upstairs, Emily called out nervously, "Dad!" Daniel turned toward the staircase. "Stay in your room, sweetheart." But Emily already appeared halfway down the stairs, clutching her stuffed rabbit, her frightened eyes darting between the strangers outside and Sarah standing frozen beside the kitchen counter. The man at the porch glanced toward Daniel. "Sir, we don't want any trouble. We simply need to speak with Miss Whitmore." The name hit the room like a lightning strike. Daniel stared at Sarah slowly. "Whitmore, not Sarah." Whitmore. His mind immediately flashed back to the phone call. The luxury cars, the repair bill, the strange conversations about corporations and power. Suddenly, every missing piece slammed together with terrifying clarity. Sarah looked at him with tears beginning to form in her eyes. My real name is Victoria. The silence afterward felt endless. Daniel laughed once under his breath. Not from amusement, but disbelief so overwhelming his brain struggled to process it. No, he muttered quietly. No, that's impossible. But deep down he already knew it wasn't, because now that the illusion cracked, he could finally see her clearly. The confidence hidden beneath exhaustion, the intelligence in her eyes, the quiet authority she carried even while pretending to be ordinary. Victoria Whitmore, the billionaire CEO whose face appeared on business magazines across America, the woman who owned half the transportation industry, the same executive workers cursed daily inside truck stops and warehouses. Emily looked completely confused. Miss Sarah, she whispered. Victoria's composure shattered at the sound of that name. Tears slipped down her face as she knelt in front of Emily slowly. I'm sorry I lied to you. Emily frowned softly. You're not Sarah? Victoria swallowed hard. Sarah was my middle name. I used it because I needed people to see me differently for a while. Daniel stared at her in stunned silence while anger, betrayal, confusion, and something far more painful twisted violently inside his chest. You're Victoria Whitmore, he finally said. The owner of Western Horizon. Victoria looked at him quietly. Yes. Daniel stepped backward like the words physically hit him. You own the company that's been destroying my life. Daniel, you let drivers work 80 hours a week in broken trucks while executives sit in million-dollar offices. Victoria flinched visibly. You knew who I was this whole time? At first, no, she admitted softly. When I got into your truck, I didn't know you worked for Western Horizon. But after hearing your last name at the motel, I realized. Daniel's face hardened immediately. And you still stayed. Yes. Why? Victoria's eyes filled with emotion too heavy to hide anymore. Because for the first time in years, somebody treated me like a human being instead of a billionaire. The room fell silent except for rain hammering the roof. Daniel wanted to scream at her. Part of him wanted to throw her out immediately. But another part remembered Emily laughing again for the first time since Lily died. He remembered Victoria sitting beside his daughter during nightmares, fixing the garden, listening to stories nobody else cared about. None of it felt fake. And that confused him more than anything. The man outside cleared his throat gently. Ma'am, the board members are demanding your return to Chicago immediately. The media's already reporting your disappearance. Victoria wiped her tears quickly and stood. I'll come. Emily suddenly grabbed Victoria's hand. You're leaving? That question nearly broke the entire room. Victoria looked down at her, struggling to speak. I have to. Emily's voice trembled instantly. But you promised we'd finish planting flowers tomorrow. Daniel saw something collapse inside Victoria at those words. She knelt again slowly, brushing hair away from Emily's face with shaking fingers. Listen to me carefully, sweetheart, she whispered. You are one of the bravest little girls I've ever met. Don't ever let this world make you believe you're invisible, okay? Emily burst into tears and hugged her tightly. Victoria held her like someone terrified of letting go. Daniel looked away, because suddenly the anger inside him became tangled with guilt and heartbreak. He couldn't explain. A few minutes later, Victoria stepped toward the front door, but before leaving, she turned toward Daniel one last time. No, you hate me right now, she said quietly. You probably should, but everything you told me, every story about your drivers, your life, your daughter, I swear to you I listened. Daniel crossed his arms coldly. Listening doesn't change anything. Victoria stared at him for several seconds. You're right, she whispered. But maybe action will. Then she walked into the storm. The SUVs disappeared into the darkness minutes later, leaving only silence behind. Emily cried herself to sleep that night, clutching the sweater. Victoria accidentally left behind on the couch. Daniel barely slept at all. The next morning, America exploded with headlines. Billionaire CEO Victoria Whitmore found after disappearance. Whitmore missing for 3 weeks during secret investigation. Transportation empire in crisis. Daniel sat frozen at his kitchen. Table-watching television reports explained that Victoria Whitmore had vanished intentionally after rumors of corruption and labor. Abuse surfaced inside several subsidiaries of Whitmore Holdings. News analysts speculated she had gone undercover to investigate her own company operations personally after receiving anonymous reports about worker exploitation. Daniel's stomach tightened. Undercover. The reporters had no idea how literal that word truly was. Then another headline appeared. Emergency press conference scheduled in Chicago. By evening, Every major news network broadcast Victoria standing behind a podium inside Whitmore Holdings headquarters. But she looked completely different now from the exhausted woman who drank coffee quietly in Oklahoma diners. She wore a sharp black suit, her posture powerful and commanding, while reporters shouted questions from every direction. Yet Daniel noticed something immediately. She looked sad, deeply sad. Victoria stepped toward the microphone. "For the last 3 weeks," she began calmly, "I traveled anonymously through facilities owned by my company across Texas, Oklahoma, New Mexico, and Colorado. I rode with truck drivers. I visited warehouses. I stayed in motels where workers live while executives discuss profits hundreds of miles away." Murmurs spread across the room. Victoria continued. "What I discovered horrified me." Daniel slowly sat forward. "For years, systemic abuse has infected multiple divisions of Whitmore Holdings. Unsafe working conditions, manipulated payroll systems, illegal route expectations, employee intimidation, medical negligence." The room erupted instantly. Stock prices began crashing live on television. Executives behind her looked panicked. Then Victoria said something that made Daniel's chest tighten. "A father and daughter I met during this journey reminded me what humanity actually looks like. They showed kindness to a stranger without expecting anything in return. Even while struggling themselves, they changed me." Daniel glanced upstairs toward Emily's bedroom. Victoria's voice grew emotional. "I built an empire so large that I stopped seeing the people carrying it on their backs." Reporters shouted questions rapidly. "Are you referring to Western Horizon Logistics?" "Yes," Victoria answered immediately. "Among others." "Will executives be fired?" "Yes." "Will workers receive compensation?" "Yes." "Will you step down as CEO?" Victoria paused, then slowly shook her head. "No, because I created this culture through distance and neglect. Walking away would be easier. Fixing it is harder." For the next hour, America watched one of the largest corporate scandals in years unfold live on television. Multiple executives were terminated immediately. Federal investigations launched. Emergency worker relief programs announced. Compensation funds created for injured employees. But one moment changed Daniel forever. Near the end of the press conference, a reporter asked quietly, "What made you finally realize how disconnected you'd become?" Victoria stood silently for several seconds before answering. "One night," she said softly, "I watched a little girl pretend not to notice. Her father skipping dinner because there wasn't enough food for both of them. And I realized I had spent years reading numbers while forgetting. Those numbers were human lives." Daniel immediately looked away from the television because emotion slammed into him, too hard to breathe properly. Upstairs, Emily quietly descended the staircase. "Was that Miss Sarah?" Daniel nodded slowly. Emily stared at the screen sadly. "She looks lonely." That sentence haunted Daniel more than he expected, because despite everything, Emily was right. Over the next month, Daniel's life changed in ways he never imagined possible. Western Horizon replaced management teams nationwide. Driver salaries increased dramatically. Safer route policies were introduced. Daniel received compensation checks covering years of withheld overtime pay. The company even approved local routes allowing him to spend nights at home with Emily instead of constantly traveling cross-country. But strangely, Daniel never heard from Victoria personally again. Not one call, not one message. Part of him told himself that was for the best. Their worlds were too different. She belonged inside skyscrapers and corporate boardrooms while he belonged behind a steering wheel driving lonely highways. Still, the silence hurt more than he expected. Emily missed her terribly. Some nights Daniel found her sitting quietly in the garden Victoria repaired, staring at the flowers they never finished planting together. Then winter arrived. 3 days before Christmas, Daniel returned home after finishing an early local delivery route and found a black, luxury SUV parked outside his house again. His heartbeat immediately quickened. Victoria stood near the porch wearing a long dark coat while snow drifted softly around her. No bodyguards this time, no reporters, just her. For several seconds, neither spoke. Then Victoria smiled faintly. "I wasn't sure if you'd want to see me." Daniel stepped closer slowly. "What are you doing here?" Victoria looked down briefly before answering. "Trying to do one thing in my life that isn't controlled by lawyers or shareholders." The front door suddenly burst open behind Daniel. Emily spotted her instantly. "Miss Sarah!" Victoria barely had time to react before Emily threw herself into her arms. And for the first time since Daniel met her, Victoria Whitmore completely broke down crying. Not quiet tears, real ones. The kind people spend years holding inside. Emily hugged her tightly while snowflakes melted against Victoria's hair. "You came back," Emily whispered. Victoria held her closer. "I promised we'd finish planting flowers." Daniel watched silently from the porch. overwhelmed by something he couldn't fully name anymore. Later that night, after Emily fell asleep on the couch between Christmas movies, Daniel and Victoria sat quietly at the kitchen table, while snow covered the dark Texas fields outside. Victoria stared into her coffee cup. "You were right to hate me." Daniel shook his head slowly. "I did hate you for a while. And now," he looked at her carefully, "now I think you were probably lonelier than the rest of us." Victoria's eyes filled again. "You have no idea." For a long moment, neither spoke. Then Daniel finally asked the question lingering inside him for weeks. "Why did you really stay with us?" Victoria's answer came almost immediately. "Because your house was the first place in years where nobody wanted anything from me." The silence afterward felt gentle instead of painful. Victoria continued quietly. "My father built Whitmore Holdings from nothing. He taught me success meant becoming untouchable, powerful, feared, but somewhere along the way, I became surrounded by people who only spoke to my title instead of me." Her voice cracked slightly. "Then your daughter handed me half a grilled cheese sandwich in a diner because she thought I looked hungry." Daniel smiled faintly despite himself. "That sounds like Emily." Victoria nodded while tears slipped down her face again. "She reminded me who I used to be before money turned every relationship transactional." Daniel studied her carefully in the warm kitchen light. For the first time, he no longer saw a billionaire executive or mysterious stranger. He simply saw a tired human being trying desperately to reconnect with something real. Finally, he spoke softly. "You changed our lives too." Victoria looked stunned by those words. Daniel glanced toward sleeping Emily. She laughs again. That nearly destroyed her composure completely. Outside, snow continued falling peacefully beneath the dark Texas sky while Old Christmas music played softly from the living room television. And inside that tiny, worn-down house, 3 lonely people sat together quietly, realizing something most of the world never understands until it's too late. Kindness is never small. Sometimes the person standing in front of you, carrying invisible pain, is someone the world considers powerful beyond imagination. Sometimes the people with the least to give offer the most humanity. And sometimes a single act of compassion on a rainy night inside a forgotten roadside diner can change the course of multiple lives forever. Because in the end, titles disappear, money fades, power shifts. But people never forget how you made them feel when they needed kindness the most.